Well, good day all. Uh, there was an article in yesterday's paper that I thought I might like to discuss. I was a little surprised reading it, and I guess before discussing it, I should go back to the time when I was growing up and when I was first married, because, of course, that was some years ago and things were substantially different. There were no IVF available in those days whatsoever, and in essence, there was a very large, for want of a better word, industry involving adoption of children, where, as a general rule, many mothers, young teenage mothers or older mothers who, for one reason or another, couldn't look after their kids, decided to put them up for adoption. And of course, it was also the case where a number of institutions probably forced adoptions on mothers, which was a most unhappy event, to say the least. But the reality was there was a great demand for adoption of children because there was a significant number of the population that for one reason or another couldn't have kids. And it did allow for the children who may have been otherwise grown up in circumstances not particularly good to move into a loving family with parents who really wanted a child and would look after them. And I have no doubt that on average, the adopted children had a much better life than they would have had they stayed with their mothers. And look, this is on average, of course. But the main story was that many children were put up for adoption, and in general, they finished up in very happy households. And of course, there were difficulties. It's the old story of nature versus nurture, and I certainly know of some people who adopted children, and the nature side popped out where the child was a very, very difficult child, and it was part of the genetics of the child. He caused much heartache to his parents as he grew up, and in fact didn't stay in touch with them once he reached maturity. But that is more the exception rather than the rule. So that was the situation. Then, of course, IVF suddenly came into town. But on top of that, there was also a groundswell of opinion in society where it became an article of faith that the child was always better to be brought up by its birth mother. Now, this is absolute nonsense. In many cases, or in some cases, yes, that may be. But in many cases, the child will finish up in an area living in poverty with his mother. Many of the mothers move from one relationship to another, one after the other. And there are many children that stay with their mother that really have not had lives as good as they would have had they been put forward for adoption. But now, of course, it's almost incumbent on mothers to keep their children. There's no suggestion. The adoption industry has vanished. There are virtually no children put up for adoption these days. This is because the mothers raise the children on their own. They are given good government support, and in many cases, I think the children suffer. In many cases, they don't. But I think on balance, adoption was probably a better situation for those mothers that found that they could not look after the child effectively themselves. However, IVF suddenly came on the scene. And now, of course, the article in the paper that I was talking about earlier that surprised me, 1 in 18 bubs are now made by IVF. My God, 1 in 18. I found that absolutely extraordinary. If you had asked me, I might have said maybe 1 in 100. Obviously, this industry is a very, very big industry. And yes, there is demand for IVF. Now, I don't know much about IVF. I'm going to start and do a little bit of study on it at this stage. I've no idea whether, I presume the whole IVF business runs the gamut of husband donating the sperm to the wife and that being implanted in the wife, right through to donors providing sperm for the wife, right through presumably to donors providing sperm to a birth mother, and then the child is handed back to the father who donated the sperm and his current wife. I presume that's the way it goes. I really don't know. But either way, it is a stunning figure, an absolutely stunning figure. And it is not cheap. And it is quite an exercise for the women to go through. For the men, presumably not so bad. I do need to do a bit more research on this. I'm not sure at all about IVF. I really don't know. We're conducting an experiment here, a very large-scale experiment. And we won't know the outcome until a few generations have gone past. If there is a genetic problem with the mother or the father not having children, will that be passed on to the children? I've got no idea. And the only way we can probably find out is once we get second and third and fourth generations of IVF people going there, to see if there is an increase in the number of people seeking IVF who are born from IVF. I've no idea. And it's just an experiment. We don't have an answer to it. So it's a real trade-off, isn't it? We are going ahead and doing this in any case. Is there a major downside? There may be in the future. It may be that the future children of IVF will have more difficulty in conceiving. Maybe, maybe not. It is an experiment. We'll just have to wait and see what the situation is. I'm still amazed that 1 in 18, and having said 1 in 18, the success of IVF is less than 50%. So that the reality is, if it was successful, we'd have 1 in 10 babies born through IVF. Quite extraordinary. I don't quite know the situation, nor do I know if the number of infertile couples has increased in the last few decades, or whether there's always been apparently this fairly large percentage of the population. You're looking at least 10% from the sound of it, who have difficulty in conceiving. And there'll be probably many more who haven't gone through IVF. So we're talking about a very significant number, and we're talking about a very large social experiment. And that's all apart from the moral questions, of course, that are involved. And that is yet another bag of worms. In any case, they're just my general thoughts on IVF and adoption. And I don't have any answers, but it's an ongoing experiment. And that's it for now. Take care. Bye.